Mark was just an ordinary guy. He had a 9-to-5 job at a local bookstore, spent his weekends with friends at coffee shops, and enjoyed the quiet, simple life. He never expected that one evening, everything he knew would change in a way that defied logic and reason. It was a calm evening as the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow across the park. Mark decided to take a stroll after work. The cool breeze against his skin felt refreshing, and he appreciated the peaceful atmosphere. The park was nearly empty, save for a few people walking their dogs and a couple of kids playing soccer in the distance. As he walked along the winding path, his thoughts drifted away from the mundane worries of daily life. But then, something caught his eye. Under the soft light of a lamppost stood a woman. An unfamiliar woman. One who didn't seem to belong. She was unlike anyone Mark had ever seen before. Her skin glowed with an almost ethereal light, and her long silver hair seemed to shimmer in the fading sunlight. Her eyes, an intense green that seemed almost too bright for a human, pierced through the dimming surroundings. The strange thing was there was no one else around her, yet she stood there as if she was waiting for him. Mark stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. He felt drawn to her, but also a sense of confusion washed over him. Why was she there? What was she doing? The woman smiled at him. It wasn't a casual smile. It was warm, knowing, as if she had been expecting him all along. "Hello, Mark," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying across the empty park. Mark blinked, stunned. How did she know his name? His mind raced as he tried to think of any interactions he might have had with her, but none came to mind. He had never seen her before in his life. I'm sorry," he stammered. "But do I know you?" The woman stepped forward slowly, her movements graceful, almost gliding. As she approached, Mark felt a strange sense of calm washing over him. "You don't know me yet," she replied, "but you will. My name is Lyra. I've come to deliver a message that will change everything." Mark's confusion deepened. His first instinct was to back away, but something about her presence kept him rooted to the spot, like a magnetic force pulling him closer. "What message?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's gaze softened as she looked, up at the stars above them and then back at Mark. "I have a secret to share with you," she said, her voice steady and calm. "A secret that, once revealed, will make your world seem so much larger than you've ever imagined." Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why, but he felt a strange sense of trust in her words. Was it the calmness in her tone, or the magnetic pull of her presence? Whatever it was, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was not a coincidence. "I'm not from here," she continued, her eyes glimmering as if she were sharing something sacred. "I'm from another world, a place far, far away from Earth. My species has been observing humanity for a long time, but I'm here now because, well, I need you, Mark." Mark stared at her, unable to comprehend her words. He had heard of aliens, of course, in science fiction movies and stories, but this was different. She was standing right in front of him, speaking about another world, another species. The disbelief was overwhelming, yet he couldn't deny the sincerity in her eyes. You're an alien?" he asked incredulously. Lyra smiled again, her lips curving into a knowing expression. "Yes, I am, and I'm not just any alien. I'm the princess of my people, and I've come to you because there is something very important that you need to know." Mark's mind was racing. He wanted to run, to dismiss everything as a dream, but the pull of her presence held him in place. What could this woman possibly want with him? Why did she seek him out? Why me? Mark finally managed to ask. Why me, of all people? Lyra took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because you, Mark, are part of something much greater than you can imagine. There is a prophecy, one that foretells the union between my species and yours. A prophecy that involves you." Mark's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. He opened his mouth to speak, but Lyra raised her hand gently to silence him. "You don't need to understand it all right now," she said, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "What matters is that you and I are connected. The universe has brought us together, Mark, and there's something you must know. The child we will have together will change everything." Mark's heart skipped a beat. The words didn't make sense, but at the same time, they felt too real to ignore. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the situation he found himself in. "I'm pregnant with your child," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper, but it felt like the weight of the universe rested on those words. Mark froze, his world suddenly spinning. The shock of her words hit him like a tidal wave, and he couldn't breathe. Pregnant? With his child? How was that even possible? As the wind rustled through the trees and the stars shone down on them, Mark stood in stunned silence, trying to process the unthinkable. He had come to the park for a quiet evening, never expecting that his life would change forever in a single moment. And yet, here he was, standing before an alien princess, learning that his destiny had just taken a turn he never could have predicted. Mark could hardly process the words Lyra had just spoken. He stood there, his mind spinning, struggling to comprehend what was happening. He had always thought his life was simple, uncomplicated. But now, in the quiet park under the soft glow of the streetlights, his world was crumbling, or rather, expanding into something far beyond his understanding. "I know this is a lot to take in," Lyra said gently, her voice warm yet firm. She seemed to understand the shock and disbelief written across Mark's face. "But you need to hear the truth, Mark. The prophecy that binds our two worlds is older than my species itself. And now, it involves you." Mark swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He wanted to walk away, to find a reason to dismiss everything Lyra was saying as nonsense. But something about her presence, the way she spoke, the sincerity in her eyes, made him hesitate. "The prophecy?" he asked, his voice shaky. "What does it have to do with me?" Lyra stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "You and I are not simply two beings from different worlds. The ancient text foretold of a union between my people and yours. It speaks of a child born of both species who would bridge the gap between our worlds and usher in a new era." Mark's heart raced again, this time not from fear, but from the weight of what she was telling him. "A child? Their child?" Lyra continued. "For centuries, the prophecy was just that, an old tale passed down through generations. Most of my people thought it was a myth, something to be forgotten. But I've always known that one day, it would become real." "But why me?" Mark asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm nobody special, just an average guy." Lyra smiled softly, a faint sadness in her eyes. "You are more than you think, Mark. The prophecy didn't choose just anyone. It chose someone with a connection to the stars, someone whose bloodline could carry the potential for unity between our species. And that someone is you." Mark was silent for a moment, taking in her words. His mind still couldn't fully comprehend the enormity of what Lyra was saying. A child born from them, an alien princess and an ordinary human, was supposed to unite two worlds. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, not his life. But Lyra's eyes told a different story. She wasn't lying. She wasn't crazy. She believed every word. "There's more," Lyra said, breaking through Mark's thoughts. "This child will not only be the bridge between our two species, it will have abilities that no one could ever have imagined. Powers beyond anything you or I can understand." Mark felt his knees buckle slightly. Powers? He was just an average man who worked in a bookstore. How could he be the father of a child with such incredible abilities? What kind of powers? Mark asked, his voice trembling. Lyra paused, her eyes growing darker as she spoke. "The child will be able to heal, to bring peace where there is conflict. They will possess knowledge and abilities that will shape the future. But they will also be a target. There are those who do not want this prophecy to come true. They will stop at nothing to destroy what we are trying to build." Mark's head spun. "Destroy? What do you mean? Who would want to destroy a child born of both our worlds?" Lyra's expression hardened, and Mark could see the pain behind her eyes. There are factions within my people who fear change. There are others from different galaxies who view the union between our species as a threat to their control. They fear what this child could represent. They fear the peace it could bring. So they will do everything in their power to ensure the prophecy doesn't come true. Mark could feel the weight of the world settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't about him trying to make sense of the impossible. This was about a child, his child, being born into a universe full of conflict and fear. And he had a responsibility, whether he liked it or not, to protect that child and its future. You mean, we're in danger? Mark asked quietly, still trying to wrap his mind around the gravity of the situation. Lyra nodded. Yes. The moment the prophecy began to unfold, I knew the danger would follow. I've already seen the signs. There are those who would stop at nothing to destroy us, you and me. They won't care that I'm a princess or that you're human. All they will care about is stopping the birth of a child that could change everything. Mark took a deep breath, his heart racing. So, what do we do now? Lyra's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of comfort that seemed out of place given the seriousness of the situation. We must protect the child. We must ensure that the prophecy is fulfilled, and we must prepare for the fight ahead. The park seemed suddenly quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The birds stopped chirping and the breeze died down. For a moment, everything was still, and Mark felt as if the weight of the universe was pressing down on him. How do we fight? Mark asked. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't even sure he had it in him to fight for this child. But somehow, he knew that this was not something he could back away from. The future, both of their worlds, depended on it. Lyra looked at him with a mixture of hope and determination. We fight together. We learn what we need to know. I will teach you everything I can about my people and the forces we are up against. But more than that, we will stand by each other. For our child, for our people, and for the future we can build. As she spoke, Mark felt a fire ignite inside him. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away from it. The child they were about to bring into the world held the key to something greater than both of them. And for the first time in his life, Mark felt a sense of purpose that he never thought possible. The stakes had never been higher, and as Lyra stood before him, Mark knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but it was a path they would walk, together. Mark sat in the quiet of his apartment, his mind still racing with the unimaginable truth Lyra had revealed to him. The weight of her words pressed down on him like an invisible force. He could barely focus on anything else. His thoughts kept returning to that one moment in the park when she had told him that he was to be the father of a child that would change the fate of two worlds. He had tried to go back to his normal routine after the encounter. The next morning he had gotten up, had his coffee and gone to work like he always did. But it didn't feel the same. Nothing felt the same anymore. Every conversation, every interaction felt like it was happening in a different reality, as if he were trapped between two worlds, the one he had known and the one Lyra had just thrust him into. At work he found himself distracted. The bookstore, which had once felt like a comfortable and familiar place, now seemed insignificant. His co-workers noticed that something was off. Mark couldn't focus on organizing the shelves, let alone engage in the friendly banter that had once come so easily to him. His mind kept drifting back to Lyra and the prophecy, the child that was to be born from their union, the child who was supposed to change everything. He wanted to believe her, to believe that their love could bring about peace between two species. He wanted to accept that he had a role in something much bigger than himself. But deep down, there was a nagging voice in his head telling him that it was all too much to understand, too much to accept. The truth was, Mark was terrified. He wasn't prepared for any of this. He didn't know how to protect a child that would be hunted by powerful enemies. He didn't know anything about Lyra's world or what it meant to be a part of her destiny. He was just a guy from a small town, working a boring job, living in ordinary life. What could he possibly offer to a future so grand and dangerous? That evening, Mark found himself sitting on his balcony staring at the stars. The cool night air filled his lungs, but it did little to ease the turmoil in his chest. He thought about Lyra, how calm and composed she had seemed, how she had spoken about their child with such certainty. She seemed to know exactly what was at stake, what she had to do. But Mark, he felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff looking down into an abyss, unsure of how to take the next step. His phone buzzed on the table next to him, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Lyra. "Mark, I know this is overwhelming. I understand if you need time to process, but remember, you are not alone in this. We face this together no matter how hard it gets. Call me when you're ready." His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. He wanted to reach out to her, to talk to her, to ask her how to make sense of all this. But he was afraid. Afraid of what she might say. Afraid of what it would mean for him to embrace his role in all of this. For a long time, Mark simply sat there, looking at the stars. They seemed so distant, so unreachable, just like everything Lyra had told him. His life, his world, his future, none of it seemed real anymore. He had never asked for any of this. He didn't want to be the hero. He didn't want to be part of a prophecy. He just wanted things to go back to the way they were. But life wasn't like that. The moment Lyra had walked into his life, everything had changed, and no matter how hard he tried, there was no going back. The next few days were a blur. Mark spent his time locked in his apartment, wrestling with his thoughts. He couldn't concentrate on anything. He couldn't even bring himself to go back to work. Every time he closed his eyes, all he could see was the alien princess standing before him, telling him that he was to be the father of a child that would shape the future of two worlds. The weight of that responsibility was suffocating. Lyra had made it clear that their enemies were already closing in. They had no time to waste. But how could he possibly face such a threat? How could he protect a child who, even before being born, was already the target of powerful forces that wanted to destroy everything? It wasn't just the fear of danger that paralyzed him. It was the uncertainty. He didn't know what to do, how to protect them, or even what it meant to be a father in this situation. He had never been trained for any of this. He was just a man, trying to make sense of a world that was suddenly far more complicated than he could ever have imagined. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Mark's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. He hesitated for a moment before slowly standing up. He wasn't expecting anyone, but something told him it was her. Lyra. When he opened the door, there she was, standing in the doorway, her expression serious but not without a hint of concern. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him as though waiting for him to speak. "I don't know if I can do this," Mark finally admitted, his voice shaky. "I'm not ready. I don't know how to protect the child, how to fight this battle. I don't know anything about your world, Lyra. I'm just a regular guy. What if I fail? What if I can't protect you, protect the child?" Lyra's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her presence comforting, yet powerful. "Mark, I know, this is hard, but you are stronger than you think. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to be perfect. What matters is that you stand by me, that you're willing to try. Together we can face anything." Her words, simple yet profound, struck a chord deep within him. For the first time since the revelation, Mark felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he didn't need to have all the answers. Maybe it was okay to be scared as long as he kept moving forward. "I'm not asking you to do this alone," Lyra continued. "We are in this together. I will teach you everything I can about my world, about how to protect our child. And we will face the challenges ahead, side by side." Mark took a deep breath, his heart still heavy but somehow lighter than before. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. I'm with you, Mark said, his voice steady now. I'll do whatever it takes. For the child. For us. And with that, Mark knew his life had changed forever. There was no going back. There was only the future, and whatever it would bring. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion, uncertainty, and fleeting moments of clarity. Mark couldn't escape the constant pull of the situation he found himself in. The simple life he had once known was no longer within his reach. Not when the fate of two worlds rested on his shoulders. His thoughts often spiraled as he tried to make sense of the overwhelming responsibility Lyra had placed upon him. He had tried to go back to his normal life, but each passing day felt more like a dream he couldn't wake up from. The more he learned about the prophecy, the more he realized how little he knew about anything. Lyra had told him the truth, and it was a truth he couldn't deny, no matter how much he wanted to. The child they were about to bring into the world was not just a symbol of their love, but of something much larger, something that could change the course of history for both humans and aliens. The threat of the enemies, the factions that would stop at nothing to prevent the prophecy from unfolding, weighed heavily on him. They were already out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Mark couldn't ignore it anymore. He had tried to push the reality of the situation aside, but now it was impossible. He couldn't keep pretending that everything would go back to normal. Lyra had been patient with him, offering reassurance when his doubts clouded his mind. She had never once wavered in her belief that together they could face the challenges ahead. And yet every time she spoke to him, every time she looked at him with those intense, glowing eyes, Mark found himself asking the same question over and over in his mind. Am I strong enough? But deep down, he knew that the answer wasn't as important as the choice he had to make. What would he do now? He had two options. One was to walk away, to go back to the life he had known before Lyra, before the prophecy. It would be easier. He could live a life free of danger, free of the burden of saving two worlds. He could forget about the child and the prophecy, put it all behind him. It would be simple, it would be safe. But Mark had never been the kind of man to run from responsibility. And though his heart still ached with uncertainty, he knew that running away wasn't the answer. He couldn't turn his back on Lyra, on the child, or on the future that was now so inextricably linked to his own. The thought of walking away was no longer an option. I can't leave, Mark whispered to himself, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, his eyes fixed on the city skyline outside his window. I can't turn my back on this. His mind wandered to the child they were about to have. He had thought about that child every day since Lyra had shared the news. He had never imagined being a father, especially not to a child whose very existence held the power to unite or destroy entire worlds. He had been scared. Hell, he was still scared. But what scared him even more was the thought of failing. Failing Lyra, failing the child, failing humanity itself. As he stood up and walked toward the door, Mark felt a sense of calm wash over him. His heart, still heavy with fear, also felt lighter, as though the choice had been made for him the moment Lyra had walked into his life. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: he couldn't walk away from it. When Mark arrived at Lyra's apartment, she was waiting. For him, as though she had been expecting him all along. She stood by the window looking out at the stars. The soft glow of the city lights illuminated her face, but it was the light in her eyes that drew him in. The same light that had first captivated him in the park. Without a word, he crossed the room and stood beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was filled with the weight of everything they had shared and everything that was yet to come. I've made my decision, Mark said finally, his voice steady, his gaze fixed on the stars outside. I can't run away from this. I have to do this, for you, for the child, for the future. Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with both relief and pride. She stepped closer, her hand gently resting on his chest. You've made the right choice, Mark, she said softly. This isn't just about us. It's about something much bigger. You were chosen for this, not because you're perfect, but because you have the strength to rise to the occasion. Together, we will make this work." Mark nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He had finally accepted what he had to do. There would be no more doubt, no more hesitation. He was ready to embrace his role in the prophecy and in Lyra's world. "I'm with you," Mark said, his voice firm. "I'm ready to face whatever comes. We'll protect the child and we'll protect the future. Together." Lyra smiled, the warmth of her expression filling him with a sense of purpose he had never known before. She leaned in, kissing him, gently on the lips, a kiss that held not just love but the promise of a new beginning. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Mark knew that the journey ahead would be difficult. There would be danger, uncertainty, and challenges beyond anything he could imagine. But for the first time since that fateful night in the park, he felt ready. He wasn't just a man caught in a whirlwind of circumstances anymore. He was a father-to-be, a protector of the future, and he would face whatever came his way with courage, determination, and love. Together, they would change the course of history. Together, they would fulfill the prophecy, and nothing would stand in their way.